Good morning. While everybody's finding a seat, I can make some announcements. Thank you once again for raising early and make the long and winding journey to Talence with buses breaking down, etc. Most of you found the way to Marché de Douves yesterday evening. Those who didn't, ask your fellow attendees. It's really worth it. Tonight we have a play by keynote speaker of yesterday, Zoe Philpott, and we even have a pre-play by French actors. Actually, the French actors are here in the room. You don't know yet who they are, but they will be there. We opened a lost and found. We found Asus charger and a jacket.
It's great to be here with all of you, to spend time with old friends as well as to meet new friends. It's been great. I know some of you have been with us over the past 10 years as we celebrate our 10th anniversary of Scratch. Some of you have been with us from the very beginning, others just joining us, and it's great to have everybody here together as members of the growing Scratch community. As I thought about this talk, I decided to focus on ideas from Seymour Papert, and I think there are a few reasons to focus on Seymour and to build on some of Seymour's ideas today. As many of you know, Seymour passed away almost exactly 1 year ago, so he's been on a lot of our minds a lot over the past year. Also, as we know, this is the 50th anniversary of Logo, the programming language that Seymour developed along with Cynthia and others, and many of you heard about history of Logo from Cynthia last night, and we have others here who've been very active in the Logo community like Brian Harvey and others, so we can celebrate Seymour through the anniversary of Logo. Also, with this conference putting special attention to participation from Africa, I think it's important to highlight Seymour. As many of you know, Seymour was born and grew up in South Africa. So I think it's really fair to say that the family tree of Scratch has its roots deeply in Africa. And I think there's also a special connection here in France. Actually, as Cynthia mentioned last night, one of Seymour's favorite metaphors referred to France. He would often make the comparison about how children in France learn to speak French so easily, while children in French classrooms in the United States have much trouble. And he would often say that we need to create a math land so that children can learn math as easily as children learn French growing up in France. He could have said learning Spanish in Spain or Japanese in Tokyo, but he never said that. It was always about learning French. So he had a connection there. He also spent several years here in the early 80s with the Centre Mondial, one of the early initiatives that also had connections to Africa, that did initiatives in Senegal. So there's many connections to Seymour. But probably most important is the fact that Seymour's ideas have influenced and inspired and continue to influence and inspire everything that we do with Scratch. Those of you who were at yesterday's session where Andrew and Carl talked about our work on Scratch 3.0, all of the ideas continue to be influenced and inspired by things that we've learned from Seymour. So it's always very much in our mind to be building on the ideas that Seymour put forward. But even there, when I said building on Seymour's ideas, I don't think that metaphor is quite right. I like better the idea that we see ourselves as nurturing the seeds that Seymour sowed. That I think Seymour was constantly planting new ideas, many different types of ideas. He had mathematical ideas and pedagogical ideas. He had technological ideas, epistemological ideas about the nature of knowledge itself. So Seymour was always planting new ideas, and I see a big part of our role as trying to nurture and tend to the ideas that Seymour planted, some of them more than 50 years ago. Now, again, some of Seymour's ideas took root and spread like wildfire. logo was used by millions of children around the world. I think we can also see the current enthusiasm about coding actually grew out of seeds that Seymour sowed. The maker movement can be seen as growing out of Seymour's ideas. So I think there are many ideas that Seymour planted that are, now we see them flourishing. But there are many of Seymour's ideas, especially many of his educational ideas, that flourished and grew in some places but not in others. Some have remained dormant in the soil, sometimes even stamped out as they try to grow. And I see a big part of what we do and what I hope everybody here is doing is to see how we can take those ideas and continue to nurture them. I think Seymour would have liked that metaphor in that Seymour saw learning and the spread of ideas as a very organic process. That it was not an engineering process like building a structure. In fact, you could be misled by terms like constructivism and constructionism. They sound like engineering terms, just on the word. But in fact, he saw it as a very organic process. Piaget before him also saw it that way. That really was more like a farmer or a gardener tending to ideas and helping them and nurturing them to help them spread. So I think in that spirit is what I hope that we can do. And I think I want to talk about that today, about how we're trying to help nurture some of Seymour's ideas. And in our group at the Media Lab at MIT, we sometimes talk about our guiding principles in terms of 4 words that begin with the letter P: projects, passion, peers, and play. And over the last year, as I've been reflecting upon Seymour's work, it has really struck me of how much each of these ideas that we are guided by grows directly from things that we learned from Seymour. So I want to organize my comments this morning around these 4 Ps and reflecting upon how they grow out of Seymour's ideas and how we can continue to help support these ideas and their growth today. And I think it's probably more important today than ever before, because as much as we can be so excited about the spread of Scratch and the millions and millions of children and teachers around the world using Scratch, in fact, I think it's even more important than ever in that there's a risk as Scratch spreads that we'll lose touch with those guiding ideas. And I think it's so important for us to continue to think about how we can remain true to the original vision from Seymour's ideas and the ideas we had as we created Scratch, to make sure that it doesn't get lost just with numbers of kids using the programming language, but more how we can help spread these ideas and support these ideas. So let me start by talking about the first, projects. And for each of these 4 Ps, I'll say a little bit about some ways that Seymour talked about it, ways it's influenced us, and then for each of it, I'll give you a little bit of chance to reflect on it and talk to each other about it for a brief time as well. So with projects, we'll start with a brief video clip where Seymour talks about the role of projects in learning.
I don't learn by having somebody teach me. Sometimes I might fill in a little gap here and there, but if I want to learn something, I go out and I try to undertake a project. I try to see what different people have said and get involved in a debate about it. The same thing applies to children. I'd like them to be able to acquire ideas by using them to make something, to achieve a purpose, to achieve a project. And in doing this, they are not simply banking in their vaults of their heads ideas that somebody else has pre-digested for them. They reinvent the ideas as they use them.
So obviously, if you take a look at the Scratch website, you see the central role of projects. We've based Scratch around projects, and right now you look there, there's more than 23 million projects shared by children around the world, and tens of millions more that aren't shared by children, that aren't shared at all, that children are just creating. But the project is sort of the central, unifying unit of Scratch. And to us, that seems, obvious and natural. But it's not necessarily so obvious. If you look at the way that coding is introduced in many places around the world, it's not around projects. Coding is often introduced by giving children a puzzle or a particular problem to solve. And of course, in doing that, they'll learn some particular computational ideas, and they'll learn certain of the, some of the technical skills of coding, but they won't be learning some of the things that Seymour was talking about here that we see as so important. That when you work on a project, you're learning things in the process of using it in a meaningful way. Seymour often emphasized that the importance was, the connections you make to ideas when you're in the process of using them. And too often in education, people focus on the idea that first you have to learn a concept and then you can use it. And we see this in schools all the time. Well, we have to wait. First they have to learn about it and then they can make use of it. Seymour rejected that. He said the best way to understand something is through the use. So it's not understand and then use, but understand through the use. So he was always focused on, whether for himself as a learner or supporting children as learners, saying, how can we engage people and work on projects? And in the process of work on projects, to go through the process of engaging with the ideas, playing with the ideas, trying to make use of them in ways that are meaningful to you. So we saw over and over, that's okay. To see, over and over that, that as you make use of the ideas is when you make the strongest connection to them. Again, that's been the central part of our organization of Scratch, is to make sure that children get a chance to start with an idea and then play it out in the world by creating a prototype, sharing with others, playing with it, reflecting on it, modifying their project over and over. So I think this idea of focusing on learning through projects, again, is one of the seeds that Seymour sowed that we continue to nurture, but we have to continue to nurture if you see the way that it's not most strongly adopted in the education system in general, or from the way that coding is being introduced. So the second P, passion. Again, actually, before going on here, I did say I was going to, let's take a moment just in talking about projects and what Seymour said and thinking about projects. We'll just give you like 1 minute to think about it, talk to your neighbors about the way that you see projects as important in the way that you engage with coding and with Scratch and with learning in general. So just take a moment and then we'll move on to the second P.
Test.
Okay, let's get back to the second P. I hate breaking up the conversations, but this is an experiment. It'll be interesting. Let me know afterwards how frustrating it is to have just to have these short conversations. We'll give it a try. So for the second P of passion, again, we'll start off with a clip from Seymour where he talks about the importance of building on, the learner's passion and interests.
Whereas what we really have to think about is what produces involvement, engagement, what grabs the individual. And so it's much more related to love than to logic. It's much more related to sex than to abstraction. It's much more related to how you see yourself as fitting into the social and cultural fabric, including how you see television. Is it something that's being done to you or something that you want to appropriate? That it's a matter of knowing how to put subject matter in the right sort of logical order in order for people to understand it. Education has very little to do with explanation. It has to do with engagement, with falling in love with the material.
So, actually, I love that last line where he says, education has very little to do with explanation, has to do with engagement. Because that was, in my mind, classic Seymour, where something that for most people seems obvious, that education has a lot to do with explanation. And Seymour says it has very little to do with explanation, has to do with engagement, of falling in love with the material. And again, that idea of falling in love with the things that you're learning, it comes across in his foreword to the book Mindstorms, this classic book from 1980. In his foreword, when he talks about his own childhood experience with gears, he italicizes one line. He says, I fell in love with the gears, and that made all the difference. So the gears, helped him learn the mathematics, and he talked about the mathematics. It provided a foundation for mathematical explorations he did. But he emphasized what was key was he fell in love with the gears, had meaning to him. It was part of his interaction with his father as they went out on this, his father, doing things, studying insects in the wild, and Seymour was looking at the gears on the trucks. So there were a lot of personal connections, and he fell in love with the gears. So again, I think this is a sign also that we've taken as a central principle as we've worked on Scratch, to make sure to allow everybody to work on things that they deeply care about, that allow people to build on their own passions. And again, it's so different from, you see many classrooms where everybody is working on the same problem, or even if they're working on a project, if it's everyone working on the same project, it'll connect to some people's interests, but not others. And that's so common. And to us, it was so important to make sure that everyone can work on things that they deeply care about. So, when we started Scratch, some people said, well, it could be a better system for making games. If you focus just on making games, you could choose the primitives so that it's well designed for making games. It'll be easier to get started making games, and that's all true. And then it would keep out people and exclude people who didn't have the passion for making games, but wanted to make stories and animations and interactive newsletters and all of the other millions of things that kids create on Scratch. So to us, it was always important to have this wide range of things that kids could create in Scratch, because we know that kids have this incredible wide range of interests, and we want everyone to build on their own interests. We've tried this over and over. Actually, if you look now, I know many people, in talking to people, I realize they aren't aware of, we've updated on the Scratch website. There's a new page. If you go to tips in the navigation bar, there's 10 different ways of getting started with Scratch. This is largely designed by Natalie Rusk, and each one of them has a tutorial and an educator guide for how to introduce these ideas, and activity cards. But what's important to me is not that there's one of them, but 10 of them, because there are many different pathways into Scratch. And you saw it yesterday as Carl and Andrew were talking about our next generation of Scratch. That's at the core of how we're trying to have the introductory experience for newcomers, to make sure that they have a choice of many different pathways into Scratch. We sometimes say many paths, many styles, that there should be many different ways of engaging with Scratch, of getting started with Scratch and continue to engage, both based on your interests or your learning styles. So this idea of diversity and multiplicity of ways of getting engaged, I think, is critical to the success, to having Scratch connect with kids in their lives, and something that we all need to nurture, whether it's in the designing the software or the way all of you introduce Scratch and the different activities and the ways it's introduced around the world. This idea of making sure it connects to people's interests is a core idea that, again, is another one of the seeds that Seymour sowed. So let's just take another moment and just chat for a minute about the idea of passion and the way that Seymour talked about education. I mean, very little to do with explanation, but about engagement. Okay, I'm going to interrupt again. So we're going to go on to the third P of peers. And peers here represents the social side of learning, about the importance of learning with and from others, that learning is a social activity of building on the work of others, collaborating with others, sharing with others. And actually sometimes Seymour and Piaget before him are sometimes criticized of saying that they focused too much on the individual and not enough on the social side. People point to other theorists who focus more on the social side. But actually, if you look at Seymour's writing, you definitely see some important contributions of where Seymour thinking about the culture and the community and the social side of learning. Perhaps the most striking is in the next to last chapter in Mindstorms. It's called Images of the Learning Society, or Images of a Learning Society. And in that chapter, he talks about his experience of visiting the samba schools in Brazil. And he talks about how he sort of loved the learning that was going on in the samba school, where they're practicing for the different songs and dances for the carnival in Brazil. And the samba schools bring together learners of all ages and all backgrounds, experts and novices, young and old, to all learn with and from one another with these songs and dances. And actually, Seymour's image of the samba school influenced others. Here's an image. This was not taken by Seymour, but from a colleague who was inspired by Seymour and went to visit the samba schools and took this image. And I think that Seymour sort of saw in the samba schools a type of learning where people are constantly learning, not in a formal setting of sitting down and listening to lectures, but constantly with and from one another. And again, that was inspirational to us as we worked on Scratch. We see Scratch a little bit trying to be an online samba school. And when we launched Scratch 10 years ago, we launched the online community together and integrated with the programming language. And that was important to us. We saw that the importance of the social side, of interacting with peers, was something that was going to be critical to the learning that would go on in Scratch. That we wanted from the beginning, for kids to be able to have an audience for what they created, for when they create things, to put it out there for other people to see, to comment on, and for also people to have a source of inspiration, for people to look online and see the creations that other people were making. Actually, we're influenced by Marvin Minsky in talking about Logo. He said, Logo, it's a great language, but there's no literature. And at least what I took him to mean by that is, he said, it's a nice programming language, but when we learn a regular language, we're inspired by reading great works, reading books written by others, and that inspires us to learn the language, to learn to write. And I think we want to have the same thing by looking at the projects on the Scratch website. That's the literature of Scratch, so people can see what others have done and be inspired by it. Even the name Scratch comes from a bit of a social side of Scratch. It comes from the way that disc jockeys scratch with music, and it's putting together pieces of media, but then to share with others and to remix what others have made. So that idea of remixing is even from the name of Scratch pulls upon this idea of building upon the work of others, taking pieces of what others have done, adding it together. So the spirit that we've tried to build in the Scratch community builds on the social side that we've learned about. In Rick Rose's keynote presentation yesterday morning, she talks about the key role that sharing and collaboration plays in the online community, and the way that people benefit both from the feedback they get from others and the inspiration that they get from others. So I think for us, again, that's this idea of the social side and the importance of learning with and from others is another of the seeds that Seymour sowed. And the technology was not ready in the time when Seymour was developing Logo, and it would be interesting to see what Seymour would have done had it been available. But I think with the new technology, it enabled us to explore new ways of nurturing the seeds that Seymour sowed to play out the social dimension of learning. So again, let's just take a moment and talk a little bit about the peers and the social side of learning as Seymour talked about in the Samba schools. Okay, it's time for the fourth P. Okay. So the fourth of our four Ps is the word play. And I sometimes say that this is the most misunderstood of the four Ps, because when people are play, they sometimes just think of fun and games. And again, there's nothing wrong with fun and games, but I think we mean something different when we say play. When we think of a playful approach to engaging with the world, we mean an approach where you're constantly experimenting and trying new things. And to us, that's what play is about. The focus is more on playfulness and a playful approach of engaging with the world. And again, that was something that was very important to Seymour, both in himself as a learner, but also in the way he supported others. I think Seymour was one of the most playful learners I ever met. He was both playful and serious at the same time. He cared so much about ideas, but he would constantly play with ideas and experiment with ideas and wrestle with ideas, and he'd come up with clever and playful ways of trying to push ideas in new directions. And also it was always in the environments he created, seeing how he could engage kids in experimenting and trying new things and tinkering. So the video I have for this is from when we first were trying out Lego Logo. This is in 1985, where we're connecting Lego to Seymour's Logo programming language for the first time. This is in a workshop with elementary school kids in the summer of 1985. And one of the students, Nikki, had built a little vibrating walking machine that he then controlled with Logo. And it started out where he just started building a regular car, and it wasn't so strongly constructed, and the motor fell off and started vibrating across the table. And that gave Nikki an idea, and thought, well, maybe he could use the vibration to make a machine that walks through vibration. And you'll see in this video, Nikki showing his vibrating walking machine, and Seymour makes a brief appearance when he's talking with Nikki about his vibrating walking machine.
I was experimenting. At first, I made a big thing about like 6 by 3 inches, and the motor wasn't and then when I put it on the table and turned it on to see if it would vibrate and move, it busted apart into about like 15 pieces. So then I decided to make it smaller. So I made it smaller, and now it works fine. Going upside down. Hey, look it. I have an upside.
So for me, I think actually Nikki starts saying, I was experimenting. And that's exactly the point. You know, it's not that he was told to build a particular thing and he was following the rules and trying to build the best of the thing according to the instructions, but he was experimenting and trying new things. And when things didn't go right at first, you know, when he built a car and the motor fell off, he didn't see it as a failure, but saw it as an opportunity to move in new directions. When it was too big and it fell apart, he saw it as an opportunity to rethink the design. I think that's what we were always trying to encourage, that it's not a matter of just coming up with a plan, executing it, and you're done, but you try out something. It doesn't go as you expect, and that's okay, and you should be comfortable with that, with something, quote, failing in that way, and see it as an opportunity to try new things, to learn new things. I think Seymour is always encouraging that and supporting that and what he designed. And the design of Scratch, we always try to do that as well. You know, even just with the graphical blocks, make it easy to put them apart, to put them together, take them apart, to leave extra blocks to the side that you might need to use later, to encourage tinkering, that you can just click on the block and you see what happens. It's not a matter of setting up, for it to compile and download. It's not a matter of having to put on a start block and then hit a start button. You just click on it, see what happens. So trying to make it very much where it's easy to tinker with the programming blocks the same way you tinker with Lego bricks or craft materials. I think that's something we've always tried to do in the design of Scratch, but then also in running workshops, trying to make sure there's a workshop that has a theme that allows kids to explore in different ways, to try out new ideas, to constantly be taking risks, and also to create an environment where they feel comfortable taking risks. So I think that's all part of us supporting play, is making sure there's a safe and comfortable environment for kids to take risks, try new things, and both in the design of the technology and the activities to do that. So we'll take our last very brief, quick discussion about play and tinkering. Okay, let's pull back together. So, special for the Scratch conference, I have a bonus P, a fifth P that I want to mention. And I've been thinking about this some reason. One thing that sometimes I think doesn't fully get communicated in these 4 Ps is another P of purpose. And I want to say a little about that. And actually, this might be a little hard for me to talk about, so bear with me. But when I think about Seymour, another very important part of Seymour comes from his background. And some of you might not know this, but growing up in South Africa, Seymour was very involved in anti-apartheid activities. And when Seymour went away to graduate school in England, to Cambridge, it wasn't just that he was going to go to a great education, which he got there. He was also running away because he was there was legal issues because of his activities. And it was something that Seymour was so committed to the making opportunities available to everybody. It was a central part of Seymour's growing up, was to seek a social justice for everybody, that everyone from all backgrounds, needed to have the opportunities. And it was something that was important to Seymour, and then I think carried through to everything that he did. Although Seymour's known mostly as a mathematician and creative programming languages and an educator, but I think a central part of what Seymour was about was a social activist to bring about real change in the world. And Seymour always had a global view of trying to reach all kids from all backgrounds, and a special focus in everything that he did, to make sure that the work that he did was going to try to give opportunities to those who hadn't had the opportunities in the past. And I think that's something else that was an important seed that Seymour sowed that has really influenced us in the work that we do, with Scratch. And that I think from the beginning, we've always tried to see how we can make sure that Scratch is something that can reach not just the kids who traditionally have, gone into computer programming and have, done successful projects, but can reach everybody and allow everybody to be able to, use it in a way that's meaningful to them. And to move beyond just seeing, coding as a technical skill, but something that give voice to everyone. And I think, that some of those seeds that Seymour, sowed about the importance of giving everyone the opportunity, I think it's something that really influenced us in seeing Scratch as a medium that allows everybody to express themselves, to share their voice, to be an active and equal member of the society they're part of. I think Seymour was always committed to give everybody access to the most advanced and modern technologies, because that's the way they would be able to be full and active participants in their communities, in their societies. I think that's something else, that has influenced us with Scratch, but it's something that we need to keep in mind as it gets out there. Because again, as I said in the beginning, it's wonderful that Scratch is reaching many more people, around the world. But that alone would not have kept Seymour very happy. He was frustrated the way when Logo got out there and he saw how some people were using it that didn't really follow through on his vision and his values. And there's a risk of similar things happening as Scratch spreads. And staying true to these 4 Ps, but also making sure that everyone provides an opportunity for everyone to be able to share their voice is something that I think is an important thing for all of us to keep in mind as we move forward into the next decade of Scratch. Let me just end with a story that I've told several times, so some of you might have heard me tell it before, but I will tell it again. And it's from a conference that was almost exactly 10 years ago in the summer of 2007, just a couple months after Scratch was launched. I was giving a keynote talk at another conference, actually also here in Europe, and I was talking about the first few months of Scratch and our ideas for Scratch, now what got out there, and what we'd seen kids learning through Scratch. And at the end of the talk, in the question and answer period, someone raised their hand and said, "Wasn't Seymour Papert working on these same ideas 20 years ago?" And he asked it very aggressively, and he meant it as a criticism, but I took it as a compliment, and I said yes. And I said, and I'll be proud to spend the rest of my life working on these ideas. These are important enough ideas. So, 10 years later, the same is still true, that, I take no shame and only pride in continuing to nurture the seeds that Seymour sowed. I plan to spend the rest of my life doing it, and I hope many of you will join me. Thank you.
Next is Sam. He has a minute to set up. Oh, I will wait. Can you test the mic, Sam?
Testing.
Oh, yeah. And this one?
Testing.
Quiet. Where's the image? Okay, next up is Sam Aaron, who will introduce himself and maybe not. Well, I can say I'm a big fan of his work, and I always wanted to invite him. I invited him for Amsterdam conference as well, and I totally knew I was on the right track when I found a quote that he was inspired by Seymour Papert. So I think it's a good way to continue.
Excellent. Is this working? Yes? No? Hello? Testing. Very quiet. Maybe I'll switch to these ones. Okay. Hello. I'm Sam. And I'm kind of weird because I don't really do much Scratch. And I'm really sorry about that. But I fully believe in all the principles that I've gone to many different kinds of conferences. I work in academia. I also work as a professional programmer, and I'm an artist as well. And so I've been to multiple venues and multiple conferences and multiple places where I've met these different categories of people. And it's the education people, actually, I've had the most sort of synergy with. And so you guys and the conversations I had yesterday, and hopefully the conversations I have today and tomorrow, have been the most interesting out of all these people. So I definitely feel very much at home in education. But I also find it very difficult that we categorize these things so separately. It doesn't make much sense to me. Why is technology different from art? Why is education different from technology? I mean, it doesn't make much sense. So hopefully, I'm sure what I'm saying is resonates with you in a sense that we should really be trying to combine all these things. And clearly, what Mitch just said earlier about passion and projects and peers and play and purpose, clearly, say that in a better way than I could probably ever say. And so what I'm trying to talk about is how I really take these ideas and what I'm doing with them and the direction I'm taking, which has its roots very much in the Scratch community and in Seymour's work as well, particularly, but also has a slightly different take. And I'm interested really for my own sort of selfish purposes, to tell you about this, and then for you, hopefully, to come and talk to me and give me your ideas about where you think you disagree or you agree, where you'd like to help out, where you'd like to participate, and where you'd like to share the ideas further as well. So that's really the motivation of me being here for my own purposes. I'm particularly interested in finding ways to motivate children to learn about new technologies, and in particular to learn about programming. And it's the motivation, the roots, what I'm trying to do, and how I approach the work. And I'm thinking, because I started off in this route only 5 years ago, really, when this Raspberry Pi computer came out, and it was incredibly successful, but they didn't really have much software. And there was a little bit of money going around for 3 months for a sort of small guerrilla project, which was, can someone build something that possibly could engage kids in programming that could run on the Raspberry Pi? And people knew that I was working at the University of Cambridge Computer Laboratory as a researcher, and people knew I'd done some crazy things with music software, and so there was a question, could you actually take those ideas and make them simple enough for kids to work with, and also could you get it running on the Raspberry Pi? Which, I don't know if you know, the first one was particularly low performing, and so it was a quite struggle to get something that was engaging on that thing. And so, for me, I was thinking about, where can we go with this? Well, why would a child pick things up? And I was looking at the time in the UK, we just introduced the new computer science curriculum. And so there was all sorts of bodies scrambling to provide exciting resources to engage children in programming. And there were some beauties of resources that came out from very, very well-known and established organizations, which I won't name, but I will name their projects. One was, give binary a try. Yeah, that's going to get the kids drooling. It's like, it doesn't sound... So it's like, yeah, it's like some sort of, don't give binary a try, because once you try, you'll never, you'll be addicted for the rest of your life to binary. Well, so I certainly am, yeah, 1, 0, 0, I can't stop myself. That's how I put myself to sleep. And the other one, which blew my mind, is this is clearly what the future of education, particularly programming, is about. Have fun, which, okay, I'm quite happy with that start. Have fun with sorting. How many of you have had fun sorting anything? I mean, I quite like that, but I think that I think a problem was and is, I'm sure you have seen this much more clearly than I have, is that if you go and ask weird people like me who fell into computing because it was interesting, just by its own nature, by its own structures, that's not necessarily going to be the kinds of things that engage everybody. And so I might love sorting and go into the different kinds of sorting, but is that the kind of activity that's going to engage more people? And so my question was, what is the kind of things that engage people? And I think it's things which allow people to express themselves in new ways. And it's also mirroring people who do that expression in virtuosic ways. And so the question I had was, why do people pick up a guitar? Like, why would you bother doing that? Why would you pick up any kind of instrument? And I don't think it's because guitars are beautiful. And I don't think necessarily it's because there's intrinsic properties, like in sorting, of the string frequencies being manipulated, or the way the resonance works with certain types of wood. You know, like, you're not going to go for that guitar. You've seen Jimi Hendrix, right? I want to be Jimmy. You know, and so what's he got? What is that wooden medallion he's wearing around his neck? Oh, it's a guitar. Okay, I need one of those. And so I think that we need these motivational figures and these virtuosic sort of activities, in the case of music, performances, which will drive the motivation. And then people pick up the guitar, and then people spend the hours and hours and hours and hours to learn how to do that. And then the other aspect as well is to make sure that the interface to the thing you're creating, that you want children and everyone really, not just about children, to work with, is also very simple. So the guiding principle for me with my work with this crazy system I'm about to show you is the piano, right? Because I can teach every one of you how to play every single note on a piano in 5 seconds. Isn't that amazing, right? But why would you bother to do that? Like, okay, that's great, Sam, I can play lots of notes. But you've seen virtuosic pianists. You've seen what's possible. You've seen the range of music that can come out of your piano. And you can start to understand, maybe there's something in this which I can use to express myself. I don't like any of the other musicians. I want to make my own music, but I can totally imagine making it with a piano. And I know how to get started, and I know I just need to spend time to practice. So these things have guided and principled me. And so what I'm looking at with my software isn't something that's wide like Scratch. I think that's a very beautiful and ambitious and fabulous endeavor. But I don't really have a team. I'm just really me and lots of fabulous, very just lovely people giving me their time through the open source communities. But in terms of actual people that are working full time, it's just me. So I don't really have all this amount of effort that I can put into something. I have to be very focused. Instead of trying to be broad, I'm trying to be very narrow, but also be very, very tall. So is it possible to make something that's very simple to get started, but also is it possible to use the same system in a professional capacity? So can we provide pathways from zero to professional that go the full route? And so I hope I've achieved this, and I hope that you'll be able to be interested and enjoy this. I'm going to demonstrate it in two different ways. I'm going to give you a quick demo of the system now, but also on Friday evening, I'm going to do a full performance on a boat, so you can come and dance to my music. And yeah, honestly, so this is the system here. It's called Sonic Pi. It's freely available for Raspberry Pi, Mac, Windows, and generic Linux. So it's entirely free. It's entirely open source. Sorry. Is this working now? Yes, absolutely, right. Okay, can you still hear me? Is that good? Yes, right. So I wanted to show you a couple of examples. First of all, here, this is a performance of a musician at a musical venue. It's all quite a standard thing, right? So there's a big stage, there's lights, there's a big screen with a performer performing. Happens to be me, ha ha ha. That's me there. And this is code on the screen, right? So people who are watching the performance are seeing this. They're seeing code being projected. They're seeing how the music is being made. They're seeing the recipes. They're seeing all the underlying structures. And it's written in a way that 10-year-old children can understand. And this is the goal, because if you go and see these crazy electronic music performances, you've got no idea what they're doing. Are they pressing play? Are they actually doing the music live? Is it improvised? Is it choreographed? What's going on? It's all hidden. When you've got code, you can start to project and share. And so if people have actually spent some time to learn the basics of Sonic Pi, then they can start to understand what on earth I'm doing. And they can have a window into that performance. So that's what's going on. And what should we talking about? Yeah, I'll talk those things later. Let's go back to Sonic Pi. So let's just launch it. It's just a standard application. It'll just boot up and take a little time. What it's doing is building this very crazy synthesizer in the background. And here we are. We're in the first program. And it's text. So I'm sorry about that, if that's a problem for you. But it's very simple text, and it's very much like Logo. So it's not much more complicated than that. And it was designed in the UK curriculum. We have to specifically teach a text-based language. I don't know why, but that's the requirement. And it also frustrates me when teachers say, oh, we need to teach a proper programming language, not Scratch. Like, seriously. Like, Scratch has got, in terms of programming concepts and the fact you've got modifying the abstract syntax tree as a manipulable object is like futuristic programming to me. But it's way weird how people perceive text as being real programming, but it's not. Anyway, there we are, play 70. There's the first program you might write. And it's just like Logo, move forward 10, right? Run this code. We have a beep. There we are, that's the first program. And the great thing here is we have all these opportunities for learning. We can talk about what numbers are. We can talk about abstractions. We can talk about the fact that numbers go up and down. And those things that can go up and down can map onto other things which can go up and down. Well, what else can go up and down? Well, me. That's quite good. Yeah, I can do that. But also notes and frequencies. So if I choose a higher frequency, higher note, I can make a higher note and a lower frequency. We can test the subwoofer in the system. None. No bass in this room. Hopefully the boat will be better later. Let's see where we can get something there. Look, right. So we can start to understand about human perception of audio. We can understand about the ability for sound systems to reproduce certain frequencies, all from one line of code. And you might want to know what that means musically. What is 50, Sam? What is that? I don't care. It's a number. I can talk about it later if you're interested, but really, if we try and say you need to understand music theory before you can code music, that's just a nuts starting point. So you have to just say, it's just a number. Do you like the note? Do you want a higher one or a lower one? Choose a higher number or a low number and just keep changing it until you find one you like. And then you stop. And then you say, well, what's next? Well, okay, I'm going to do 2 notes. Right, let's play, I can't type one-handed. Let's go 75. Let's go crazy. And that might surprise you in terms of programs, but it's not that crazy. In the early days, this did do play 50, then play 75. But because computers are so crazy quick, that you could then say, well, actually, that sounds the same. Right? So the speed of computers becomes something you can actually perceive. Although these days, of this version, they really are played exactly, sampled accurately at the same time, because in music, we really care about timing. And there's lots of crazy timing stuff inside Sonic Pi, which I won't bore you with the details, but if you're interested, come and talk to me afterwards. And so we need, if we want to make a melody, so that's a chord, from a note to a chord. If we want to make a melody, we need one more command, and that's sleep, and that's the computer to wait. So now we have the ability to make a melody. Now, this is the interesting thing. It won't surprise you people at all, I'm sure, because with Logo, you've got pen down, pen up, rotate forwards, and arc. You can draw any picture, anything. That's just, and people go, really, any picture? Well, with these 2 commands, you can make any melody, anything, any Beethoven, any Daft Punk, any crazy things. It's not going to sound exactly the same, and there's lots of things missing, like expression and the duration of the note and all these other things, which we can start to show you how you can add. But in terms of the basics, you can go into a classroom, teach these 2 commands, and let them go wild, and they do. And they go play, sleep, play, sleep, play, sleep, play, and they're making their own pieces. And the lovely thing is, after half an hour, you plug in speakers to the children, and you get totally different music. And that's beautiful. So when I see these lesson plans, which specifically say, I'm talking about Sonic Pi in this case, this is the music you have to write in this code club, whatever it is, that depresses me. Because there isn't one piece of music that everyone writes. You write your own music. And with these 2 commands, children have the tools to do that. So why aren't we teaching those things? And I'm sure that doesn't surprise you at all when you're coming from Scratch World. Now, where can we go from here? I don't know how long have I got, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Yeah, where can we go from here? This is the exciting question, and I think this is the question that we all should be asking. Because once you've got access to playing all the melodies, what else would you do? And I think that the exciting thing here is that programming languages give us amazing tools to do crazy new things. And so let me quickly show you some of those things, if that's okay. But really, this is really what it's all about. And in fact, the first version of Sonic Pi, this is all it did. And it was enough to teach computer science. If I swap these over. Is this working now? Yeah. Okay, cool. So I've got this play, I've got this sleep. What else can I do? Well, I can change the notes, obviously. I can also change the synthesizers, so I can play with the different sounds. These are all synthesized in real time. So all these different sounds you can play with. We've got the piano sound. We've also got like detuned saw waves. Lovely. And then the thing is that kids would always ask things like, how do I make it sound better? You know, and that's a hard question. And the answer really is you can't, because it's not on the curriculum, which is never a really good answer. Thank you very much. So you have to cheat. You have to throw these things in. So a lot of the ideas in Sonic Pi came out through wanting to be able to allow the children to do the things they wanted to, whilst also not making it too difficult for the teachers to slip in when the curriculum doesn't cover it. So let's think about effects. So if I say with effects reverb, I want to have some reverb. I choose where the reverb starts and I choose where the reverb ends. And if you can just squint your eyes and imagine pretty colors, it's pretty much like a Scratch program, right? A bit of reverb there. If I change the room size to 1, you should be hearing some reverb there. Or if I change it to echo, I'll change this to, what else we got? D-try. So we can start to play around with adding these effects. And of course, I can nest these things quite easily. So if I say with effects echo and with effects reverb. Now, if you're a Lisp programmer, this will make you smile because we are working correctly from the inside outwards. And so the notes, the play 70 goes through the echo and then goes through the reverb and then gets the outside context, which is the speakers. And so that's why you hear it. So now we have the ability to play any notes. And of course, we can also play notes in between notes if you want to. If you want to do sort of crazy non-Western scale music, that's entirely possible. But also we can add all these effects and we can change the synthesizer. So already we have a lot of tools for composition. And at the moment I'm composing. And I can do things like repetitions. I can do like 7 times, do this, which we have. And we have the ability to play these things. I can also change things like the synth defaults. To have like a sustain of 0.1. I want to release actually. Much shorter staccato notes. And so you can start to play around with these things. And these are like full synthesizers. So if I look at the D-Tri synthesizer, I can look at it, look at the documentation. There's documentation for everything. You can see all those black boxes there. They're all knobs you can turn on the synthesizer and manipulate. So you don't need to know about them, but if you do, then you can start to really have a lot of power and change and control over the sounds that you're making. And each of the synthesizers has up to like 30 different knobs, and there's more synthesizers added with each version. So that's a lot of fun to play with. Now, what else can you do? So what have we got here now is the basics to teach basic computer science curriculum. Functions, I haven't shown you that, but you can easily write functions. You can call all this a name and do it 3 times. Iteration, we've got randomization in there, and I've got some crazy ideas about that, which I'm happy to talk about later. But the effect is that even when you're using randomization, you're able to reproduce the music you're making. It's fully deterministic. So there's a philosophy behind Sonic Pi, which is not typical of programming languages, which is to make sure that if I share with you my composition, you're going to hear the same thing that I heard as well. Unless I specifically want it to be different every time, that might be a philosophical choice. Then I make that the case, I can do that too. But the default is, any code that I play on my machine and I hear, if I give it to you on your machine, whatever the operating system, you should hear the same piece of music, even if it has randomization. That's really important, because then we can start to use randomization as a building block. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's have a look. So let's think about how I might compose a melody. So I might want to have 8 notes in my melody. So I'm going to do something 8 times. And I want to play the notes. And I want to have it as a release time to be short. I haven't gone into details about this, but in the documentation, there's a full tutorial. And in section 2.4, you can start to see what envelopes are in terms of sound. So you can see that the sound goes from quiet to loud instantly and then fades out over a period of time. You can change all this around. You can fade in over long periods of time, all this kind of stuff if you want to. But by default, really, the most simple thing to look at is how long does it take for the note to die out? So by default, it's 1 second, but if I change it to 0.1, it's very short. So let's do that, and then sleep for, 0.125 seconds. And I don't know what n is, so n is 60. So there's my composition. It's not very exciting. Let's make it a bit more exciting. So what can I do? Well, I know a bit about music, so I know I want to play E octave 4, so I can do that too. But I want to play a scale. I want to play notes from a scale. So actually, I'm just going to use scale E4 minor pentatonic. That's playing the whole scale, so all the notes. So I'm going to choose one of those notes. Now you can understand about the randomization. I'm choosing a random note, but it's the same choice every time. So I might not like that choice, so I'm going to change the seed to some random number. Ooh. Oh, there's a bug. Brilliant. Why is that doing? It's because I'm setting it every time around the loop. And that's another thing that's really important, is you want to be able to make mistakes and experiment. And when it does something you don't think is going to happen, it's always worth the time to spend thinking, why is this not working? And in the early days, I would spend hours just figuring out why it's not working. Sometimes it was a bug. Sometimes it was a bug in my understanding. And it's trying to tease those two things apart was always an interesting activity. So now I'm setting this thing called a seed. What we have essentially is the randomization is a deck of cards which is shuffled, and I have lots of different decks of cards, and I'm just choosing a different one here. And so, but by choosing this deck 3000, I get this particular melody. And so I can now iterate until I find one I like. And let's add some reverb to that. Change the room size to 1. So now we have the ability to play with this. And so I can call this a function now, and I can use it as a building block to my piece of music. And even though it's got randomization, it's repeatable, I can use it as a building block. So this is the point where most of programming languages would stop. Okay, so we have the ability to do the kinds of musical activity we want to do. We can make notes, we can change the sounds, we can use pre-existing data structures like scales and chords. We have repetition, we have randomization, we have effects, all stuff I've shown you in sort of very quickly. So it's obviously going woof over your head, perhaps. But 10-year-old kids can teach themselves this stuff, and they really do. And often they'll teach the teachers. And so when we're doing programming, what we tend to do is we tend to write the code. Perhaps if we're really professional, we'll look at it first a bit and think about it, and then we'll run it, and then it won't do what we want, and then we'll keep repeating and doing that until it's what we want, and then we'll release our code, or we'll put our project online. But there's more to coding than just writing in a sort of offline, asynchronous fashion. Wouldn't it be really nice if we could just have the music playing in the background and we could change it whilst it was playing until we found something we liked? And so this is the notion of live coding. And it's been around for a while, mostly in artistic circles, academic artistic circles, academic music artistic circles particularly. So we have this thing called a loop, obviously. Oh, actually, I should quickly explain this. We can also play samples as well, so we can play pre-recorded sounds. So kids would do this all the time. So we do like bass drum house and sleep for half a second. So this is now the start of my track, right? They've got the drums, right? It goes on forever, which is brilliant. So that's good. Let's comment that out a second. And kids would do this within the first couple of lessons. And then they would create another loop, and it would maybe have their bass line. So let's do another sample just for ease. Bass like this, and let's sleep for 1 second. Right, we've got our samples going. Of course, you can just record your own samples with any old recorder, and download them from the internet as well and play those. But there's some built in just to get you started. So kids would do this, and then they would do this. And what would you expect it to do? Can I borrow this second? Thanks. You can say that second. What do you expect this to do? Would you expect them to both play at the same time? Because that's what kids expect, yeah? So let's run the code. Where's the bass? So this was really fascinating to me because I wasn't expecting them to want to do this at all. Like, this is like maybe more an advanced kind of thing, but they all want to do this. And unfortunately, in the UK, the curriculum does not cover this activity. You can't do it until you're at university. Sorry. You've got to knit the two commands together manually, which is not so hard when you've got very clear and divisible numbers like 1 and a half. But if you're doing something that's a bit more polyrhythmic, that becomes a nightmare. And a full respect to people who do knitting, because that's exactly their activity. So how do we do this? How do we slip this in? Because what we need is this idea of threads, which in Scratch you already have, which is fab. But you sort of sneak it in with that little green flag. Here, we don't have a little green flag, so we have to be a bit more sneaky. And so I invented this thing called a live loop, which is essentially just a normal loop, but you give it a name. So let's try it out. So we have to anthropomorphize these things. So live loops now are musicians. So this is Kate playing the drums. This is Sally playing the bass. Okay? And they have to have unique names. I can't have two people in my band with the same name, or it just gets too confusing. So they all have to have unique names. And then when I run the code, they play music, which is nice, right? So at this point now, we're still in composition mode, and I've got maybe 2 minutes yet to show you where you can go with this. And then there's a performance where you can see what's really this about. But there's a few interesting things here, right? The first is that we've got concurrency in a way that teachers don't realize it's concurrency, which is great, because we're not teaching concurrency, not at all. No, we're just teaching code and music and loops. But it happens to also have this property that we can have multiple of them, and you can have as many of these live loops as possible. The limiting factor is a synthesis on the CPU. But I don't know if any of you are programmers here, but when you try and get multiple threads running at the same time, that's a nightmare. Trying to get it working correctly is a nightmare. Trying to get it working correctly where your users will do anything random, like children, is an unbelievable nightmare. And then trying to get the threads to synchronize through time. These threads are exactly in time with each other. You need that with music. And you need to be able to actually, you need something else. So when you're performing, you make a mistake, right? You run the code. It kills one of the threads. The other thread's still running. So you want to be able to introduce it, but now they're offset. Can you hear that? They're not quite right. So let's break it again. So you need to be able to way to say synchronize with Kate. If you take that out. So you need to be able to way to actually, for threads to go out of synchronization, but come back in time, right? And this is the timing stuff I mentioned earlier, which I can talk to you at length about. I've written papers as well. But it's super, I've spent so much time thinking about time. It's unbelievable. But you need it with music. Now, but there's one more thing, and I'm going to quickly finish because I think the coffee is about to be served. Well, there's many more things, but there's one more particular thing I'm interested in. So far, I've shown you how you can turn code into music. I haven't actually shown you how to do these events, which is also fun, but I haven't got time for that. But there's another thing. If I'm running the code, and this is my music, right? We're all dancing away. That's a great time. I think it won't be long before we get a bit bored of this music. Do you think we get a bit bored of this music? So what we need to do is we need to change it. So we need to stop the code. Right, sorry, stop dancing. Right, I think I'm going to change the, can I hold this a second? Change the low pass filter on this. It's 70, and then we're off again, right? We're going, maybe I'll change the drums. Stop it. Okay, change the drums. You can see where I'm going with this. It's not much of a musical performance, is it, really? Then we're off again. But you can see I can start to have these changes. Wouldn't it be nice if I could just change it to 100 and have it just change without losing any beat, any time at all. So this is what we call live coding. And yeah. So in a famous UK Blue Peter style, here's one I prepared earlier. So this is a built-in example. It's got all the things I'm showing you. It's got randomization, choosing random things. Actually, it's up there. You can't see it. I'm using effects, bit crusher. I'm sleeping. I'm doing some crazy things here. Look at this. Look at line 10. I'm going backwards in time. Oh yeah, you can do that. And yeah, playing 3 live loops, and we can hear this. And I was going to change it a little bit, then I'll stop. So there's a quick demo what you can do. Now, I think there's tons of other stuff, and I haven't got time to show you. But what I want to make very clear, right, is I'm not expecting children to do this, right? No, I'm making that very clear. I am expecting them to do this if they spend the time to practice. So this is an example of where you could go. And I think it's very important to have these motivational sort of over there, wow, that's an amazing thing, but it's not good enough for it to be a floating island that's unattainable. It has to be a clear pathway from where I am or where you are to where that is. And that pathway has to have as little friction as possible, which is why the software is free, why it runs on all the platforms. And if you don't have a computer, buy a Raspberry Pi, right? They're super cheap. But if you already have a computer, don't buy a Raspberry Pi, use that. Because it's super easy to get started with any programming environment, any computer. And if you don't like music, then don't use Sonic Pi. But if you do, I think it's going to be a fabulous tool for you, and hopefully you'll be able to help me change the future of music. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That was amazing. So tomorrow after a long conference, we have an after party at the boat. The boat has 3 decks. Only deck -1 will be the experimental playful room. The upper deck is sunning with a drink. Sam, if somebody got your message and composes something, can they join you on stage? Sure, yeah? A quick hand. Shall we do some questions or just go for coffee and ask them over coffee? We go over coffee. Hey, thank you.